set? In my text, we're beginning on the top of page 25. I think the online version is maybe a little earlier, 24 perhaps?
Chinese is 24 and 25.
24, 25.
The
verse we're looking at is the leaving home. 或有见出家，解脱一切苦，修之处佛恒，常要观其灭。Read the translation that's here, and then, as usual, we'll maybe work with it a little bit. Perhaps someone sees him leaving home, become liberated from all bonds, cultivating and regulating all Buddhist practices, always delighting in contemplating still quiescence. This is also one of the acts or the actions of a Buddha, often a bodhisattva or a sage, is that they go through almost what you would call universal activities of behavior, of action. We have this being born. If you saw up above, the verses are such that we have being born, walking, the physical appearances, the speaking. All of these have distinctive qualities about them, but they're also distinctive, repetitive patterns that an awakened one goes through. And so this one is an important one. We see this in the biographies of the Buddha. We see this in the great teachers and sages all go through a cycle of this, and this is one of the important moments. The Chujia, it's called with Chinese, is to leave home. Also in the tradition, it's called pravraj, which I believe is a Sanskrit, and that means to go forth. So leaving home or going forth, it's the same act, but it has a different emphasis. Pravraj is more describing the going to, the attraction of, the marching forth. Chujia then stresses the departing, the leaving. And of course, in that single act, both elements are going on simultaneously. From one point of view, it's defined or seems distinctive because what you're leaving behind. Leaving behind, in this case, the worldly family, entering a Dharma family. You're leaving behind also career, possessions, and a number of layers of identity. Starting minimum is your name. So when you go through this act of leaving home or going forth, you go through levels of transformation, physical, mental, emotional, and I would say physiognomy. If you've known anybody who's stepped into this realm, you will see that they go through changes in their appearance, in their body, and their deportment, all part of this act of profound transformation. Some compare it to the mythical phoenix rising from the ashes. You become something totally new. I prefer myself to use the going forth rather than the leaving home. And sometimes it's also translated as the path of renunciation or becoming a renunciant. But this is an unfortunate, I think, English rendering that has to do more with the Christian tradition of monasticism, where there is a certain kind of renunciation in the act of doing it, in the mentality. Here, I don't think it's renunciation. If you're attached and clinging to something and find it hard to let go, then that letting go can seem like a renunciation. But usually when somebody gets to the point of wanting to take this move, it's almost a desire to fly. It's not it's kind of an act of liberation. When almost as if, I remember up in Maine when the baby eagles are born, there's a lot of to-do about them being in the nest. And as they get ready to fly, the woods comes alive with sounds and other animals paying attention. And finally, when that eagle, the baby eagle, takes its first flight, there's this, it's almost like the monsoon coming in India. There's just this palpable release of energy, of delight and excitement. And I think that's better describes the act of going forth than renunciation. We don't talk about prisoners renouncing their chains. We say they break free of them. It's a different thing. So this when you get to this point of doing this, it's an act of joy and liberation and freedom. You feel really as if you've been released from all troubles and worries and impediments. You feel younger. You feel lighter and yet almost paradoxically more full. It's said when somebody's ready to do this, 10,000 horses can't keep him or her away. And if somebody's not ready to do this, 10,000 horses can't pull them in. So this is an incredible act of pure intention. And often it can be associated with cries and tears of joy when this happens. Sometimes this is used to express when somebody finds their spiritual nature. In other traditions, it's called the tears of the saint. It's the melting of inhibitions and reservations and doubts and darkness in your heart and your soul. And it can manifest as tears. So in any event, we could translate this as when perhaps someone sees him or her going forth. And of course, here the second line reinforces the idea that this is not renunciation, it's liberation from all bonds, all chains, all fetters. Generally, all bonds also has many layers of meaning, and one layer just means worldly attachment and worldly entanglements, but it also is a term for klesha. Bonds, shackles, is used for the afflictions, called klesha. So it's both an inner and outer act. I want to just go a little more in this translation. Cultivating and regulating, I would say through all Buddhist practices. You have to add something here. You don't regulate Buddhist practices. It's something you do. You cultivate and you're regulated by and through those practices. So you're subduing yourself, you're transforming yourself, you're putting yourself in light harness, so to speak, and becoming disciplined. And so the practices themselves are the teacher in a sense. So you're cultivating and you're regulating yourself. You could put there cultivating, regulating oneself through all Buddhist practices, or using all Buddhist practices to cultivate and regulate. But it's something that you are taking up and doing. And then it has always delighting and contemplating still quiescence. I think this is, okay, how should we say this? It'd be better to say contemplating in still quiescence, rather than delighting and contemplating still. You don't contemplate still quiescence. Still quiescence is a form of contemplation. So you are contemplating in still quiescence, or maybe delighting in quiet meditation. That would even be better. This term, the ji me, is often used also interchangeably to mean nirvana or nibbana. So it's referring to a state in which all the fires of desire and afflictions have gone out. They've been subdued. To use a modern expression, you're chilled. You're really chilled. And chilled in the sense that you're calm and tranquil. Your mind is very lucid. And also, in the sense above the bonds then, gone, is your klesha cleansed. You're able to see through and put down everything that's artificial and conditioned. You could say it's also contemplating or sitting at ease. This is another expression that could be used for the here. Jime is not referring to nirvana per se, but referring to this above regulated and cultivating, regulating Buddhist yourself through Buddhist practice. One of those practices is Chan meditation, dhyana. And this is what it's referring to here. So I would prefer something more along the lines of delighting in quiet meditation to get this, rather than delighting and contemplating still quiescence. Because if you're contemplating still quiescence, you're still not doing it. You're thinking about it, which is how a lot of people approach Chan. Is like, oh, I'm thinking of going to a retreat. Thinking is not the same as going. It's like I'm thinking about eating. Well, eating is eating. Thinking about eating is not eating. So contemplating eating is not it's not the same thing as eating. And I would say here, in contemplating still quiescence, you're still thinking about it. It's almost, it seems that translation is, it's something you're thinking about, but in fact, the thinking processes are held in abeyance at this point. Chan meditation puts an end to the path of words and language and thought. It stills the mind rather than activates a contemplative focus on something like still quiescence. And you can go nuts if you're kind of trying to contemplate still quiescence. You're trying to think about still quiescence and wrap your mind around it. Because still quiescence happens when the mad mind stops. The mad mind looking for still quiescence is just the opposite. You'll get opposite of chilled, you'll turn into fire. So, on the other hand, I want to emphasize here, Jime, unfortunately, again, this translation of still extinction or still quiescence, the original translations when people did this was extinction. And it's an unfortunate translation from the idea of the term nirvana, which can be translated as extinguishing. But it means really, as I go back before, it's almost as if we don't say extinction, we say the fires have been quelled. When we had the fires in California, we talked about containment, and then we talked about the joy and the relief that happened when the fires finally went out and things could return. That's how you have to think about nirvana here. It's not an extinction, and therefore the corollary is that the meditation is not some blank nihilism, blank slate nihilism. So this is really critical. That's what's meant by the Six Patriarchs, gives an expression for this Chan. He calls it the Da San Mei, the great still quiescent samadhi. It doesn't have an entry or a going. It's not something you enter or leave. It's 24/7. It's a way of being in a state of complete ease and awareness simultaneously. That's why he says, everywhere engaged, nowhere attached. The Avatamsaka describes it as wisdom everywhere examines, yet is forever still. This is that almost, it seems like an oxymoron, but it's really that dynamic attention. Wisdom is aware, it everywhere examines, yet there's a stillness. And because of the stillness, it can everywhere examine. If there wasn't a stillness, it would get caught, it would get stuck, it would start paying attention to the sense objects and to sensory phenomena. But because it's still, that means the awareness is uninhibited, and that means the wisdom is. So I want to get out of this idea that this is a kind of blank slate, contemplating the navel, removal from reality, jime. And that's why it's, the next line from the Avatamsaka says, and its functions, when you're functioning in this state, it's legion and prolific. Legion and prolific, it means it's almost breathtakingly full and comprehensive. It sees all, it knows all. It's very different than what we associate with blank slate, empty nihilism. So this is maybe just working with the translation a little bit, some suggestions. These are not final, but I think it might help open up the liberating sense of this, rather than the idea of renunciation, and also the idea of then going into a dull state of withdrawal of meditation, leaving, quote, the world. That's why the text is really interesting. It says you're in the world but not of the world. The other image that's given is from the Avatamsaka, you're in the fire but you're not burned. There's many metaphors that are used to describe this, but basically the mind is aware, it sees things, it hears things, and yet, the eyes and the ears hear and see things, and yet the mind itself is still. And still means unmoved, unfazed. It doesn't go out to it, doesn't attach to it. Okay. Maybe some discussion on leaving home tonight. See how much we can get into this a bit. At one level, it's just referring to, I guess a lot of people who are listening tonight already know this, but for some people it's a new term. It can sound sort of like Dharma Bum's Jack Kerouac, I'm leaving home, or it can sound like running away from home, getting on your motorcycle and hitting the road, or the Beatles, he's leaving home after living alone for so many years. It's actually, it's a technical term for becoming a monk or a nun, and taking full monastic precepts. So this is what leaving home means. The original goes back to, at least in our cycle of things, Shakyamuni Buddha, as a Prince Siddhartha decides to abandon worldly pleasures, but also to abandon his role as the dutiful son in marriage and to be heir to the throne. And basically he cuts his own hair off, not as closely shaved as today because he's using a sword, so he's basically clipping off his top knot. He didn't shave his head. And gets on his horse and goes off, leaves the palace behind, and begins a path of wandering, mendicancy, and searching for his true spiritual nature. And he cuts all ties. Now, interesting, later he comes back and returns, but he's different. Everything else is the same, and he's different, and he comes back to share what he's learned or acquired. So on one hand, the leaving home is a instrumental beginning act of something, but it's not necessarily the final act. You can return to the home without re-entering it, and you return out of compassion and kindness to share and repay that which you've received. But your relationship is different. You're no longer there as a father, or as a son, or as a husband, or as a mother, a daughter, or a wife. You're there in a different capacity. You're there as a master of Dharma, or Dharma master, one who has been mastered by the Dharma, and one who also has mastery over the Dharma, become a teacher. In that sense, it's like you're a medical career. So it's at one level it just means that you've actually formally become a monastic, but it also at another level psychologically probably is you're renouncing sort of the mundane values of a worldly society, fame and wealth and riches and acquisition of notoriety, career, climbing the career ladder, all those things associated with the quote normal everyday life that people strive for, you're not striving for. So you leave that behind. At a deeper level, in another sense, on the mind ground, or what I would call the non-dual level, there is no leaving and there's no renunciation at all, because there's no allure to begin with and there's no attachment to begin with. So without attachment and without the allure of those things, having seen through it, you're not renouncing. It's a freedom within rather than freedom removed from. And this is the ideal of the Bodhisattva, and you'll see this in the Avatamsaka and the Platform Sutra, and also in the Vajra Sutra, where the eye see forms and inside it's quiet, the ears hear the dusty sounds, but the mind doesn't know. This is a very profound state. Sometimes it's seen, I can't do that tonight, I don't have my PowerPoint with me, and even if I did, I'm not sure I'd be able to do it. But the famous ox herding woodblock carvings show the little boy going out to find the bull or the ox, subdue it and whatnot. And at the end, once he's subdued it, he's coming back and he's riding on top of the ox, playing his flute. There's no harness anymore. And this indicates this idea of, and he's in the world, he's back in the marketplace riding around. And it indicates this idea that he has changed, the mind has changed and let go of everything. And therefore doesn't have to renounce anymore because there's no delusion to attach to or grab anything. And it's not repressed, it's not renunciation. It's a natural letting go and seeing through because everything is like a dream, illusion, bubble, shadow. And therefore you can be zizai in Chinese, which means totally at ease. This is also the image of when you see Guanyin Bodhisattva called Guanzan, where Guanyin is, one leg is up and the hand is extended over the knee that's up. And there's this, unlike the full lotus position that we associate with the Buddha image. And this Didzai indicates the Bodhisattva who's right in the middle of the world and yet unmoved and unfazed by the world and doing the Buddha's work. This is that mind ground leaving home. And so it doesn't have the mark of leaving. It just has the mark of absolute freedom and unattached caring, compassion, and kindness. This is why you see something like in the Platform Sutra where Huineng says to his, and I'm quoting his disciples, good and wise friends, if you wish to cultivate this Dharma that we've been talking about, everywhere engaged, nowhere attached, you can do it at home. You don't have to be in a monastery. If you cultivate at home, you're like the person of the East whose mind is good. Conversely, being in a monastery but not cultivating like this is like a person of the West whose mind harbor evil. Just purify your mind. That is the West of your essential nature. What he's using the West here is the Western land of ultimate bliss. Someone asked him basically, where is that? And he's saying, if you purify your mind, that is the West of your essential nature. That's the true Pure Land. If, on the other hand, you do not purify your mind, no matter where you are, you're in, quote, the East, the unpure land. And then the prefect Wei, who's asking this question, to ask him further, he says, how can it be practiced at home? Please teach us, because the impression was that it can only be practiced in a monastery. But Wei Nung's teaching is it can be done at home. He doesn't say it's easier. I want to be really clear about that. He said it can be practiced at home. In a sense, it's a little bit harder because you really don't have any of the supports of the monastery, so you're going to have to really buckle down and really get into your mind ground. That's why his next line, he says, please teach us, Prefect Wei says, and then Wei Nung answers, the mind regulated and subdued. Remember the passage above in the verse, regulated Buddhist practices. Why toil following the rules? Following, this means the discipline. So you don't have to follow the discipline if your mind is regulated and subdued. Back in the 60s, it was one of the translations was mind regulated and subdued, why bother following precepts? And so often that second part would be quoted like, yeah, I'm enlightened, why bother following precepts? If you forget the first line, it was, if your mind, if, it's a conditional, if your mind is regulated and subdued, then you don't have to worry. Well, if your mind is regulated and subdued, it's naturally holding precepts without even a thought of doing it. It's the essential nature manifesting. So it's kind of only the case that if your mind isn't regulated and subdued, you better follow the rules. If, on the other hand, your mind is regulated and subdued, the thought of not following the rules never arises. The thought of rules never arises because it's so natural to be good and centered this way. So I just want to clarify, he's a mind regulated and subdued, why toil following rules? Your steps, your conduct, your behavior straight and true, what use sitting in meditation. This is the second line. And he's basically saying if you think of monastic life as following the rules and sitting in meditation, that's true. But that is a necessary and important expedient device to get the mind back to its original state. It's medicine that you use to correct it. I guess you could say that once you follow the rules and once you've mastered this meditation technique, you will become straight and true, and you will become regulated and subdued. But for Wei Nung, he wants to stress that it's only the interior work that matters here. You're using meditation and the discipline to get to the interior transformation. Once that interior transformation occurs, you naturally are in meditation 24/7. That's what he calls the I Ching San Mei, the single practice samadhi. Walking, standing, sitting, lying down, you're always thus. This is very different idea than seeing it just externally. So I'm trying to stress this point, and it's very important. All the dharmas, all these teachings, even the monastic code comes about as a correction to our greed, anger, and stupidity, to our bad habits. It's part of the return, it's part of the healing process. And for 99.9% of the people, I would say, and all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas at some point or another, use these methods to return to the root and go back to the source. When the root is returned to, when the source is plumbed, these things naturally occur and you don't have to think about doing them. You don't have to think about taking the medicine anymore. But that's not where most of us are at. So we have to be very careful to delude ourselves and think, oh yeah, I'm in the monastery of my own mind and my steps are straight and true. That thought alone means it's not. It already has the mark of self. So you got to be really careful here. Maybe I'll say a little bit about this because Nagarjuna, the great teacher, some call him Nagarjuna Bodhisattva, was asked about this question about if you can realize nirvana naturally, what use are the monastic code and the precepts? And like Wei Nung, Nagarjuna answered, I'm just giving you a little taste of this tonight, he says, both lay people and monastics can reach the other shore. Now you say, can reach the other shore. But, this is always good, but, even so, each way has its difficult and easy aspects. Those in lay life have all manners of duties and occupations, and if they should wish to concentrating and pursuing wholeheartedly the path to full awakening, then their family duties will fall by the wayside. And if they should wholeheartedly fulfill their family duties and responsibilities, then the matters pertaining to the pursuit of the way will fall by the wayside, will be abandoned. So he says, it's not so easy as you think here, okay? They would not be able to practice the Dharma without selecting one way and abandoning the others. And that's why I say it's taking on what's difficult. This is Nagarjuna talking. And he said further, leaving lay life behind, we sever ourselves from pursuing worldly profits and fame and so forth, from indulging in dislikes and wrangling. As we devote ourselves, and this is the key, wholeheartedly, Ishin, to practicing the way. which is what I would describe as taking on what's easy. In other words, if you fully put it down and you're done with it, you can wholeheartedly take this up, and it's easier than trying to do two things at the same time. And he said, by the way, there's just the noise and bustle of a home with its many affairs, many duties, all of which are roots of entanglements and storehouses of wrongdoings. This is what is described as taking on what is extremely difficult. When we leave home, for instance, we are like someone who has departed to reside somewhere where the lands are empty and there's no one else about. In that way, our heart is as one, being beyond intentions and beyond fear. Our expectations have already been removed. Our seeking has stopped. And our wayward ways have also departed. And then he does this wonderful poem describing the liberation, not the renunciation, the liberation that comes from wholeheartedly putting it all down. And you know, it's sort of like, at some point in one's spiritual cultivation, this almost becomes like, duh. I'm sorry. It's almost like life is short. I got this brief interval between the time I'm born and the time I go. What am I to make of it? And all this running around and chasing after this and that is like, not only do you not actually get what you seek, but even getting what you seek, it's not satisfying. And so there's this free-floating anxiety associated with grasping and attaching and what Hui Neng calls the frantic passage through life. So here, the poem that Nagarjuna quotes or uses, he says, I sit at ease within the forest grove. This is Jime. I sit at ease within the forest grove. Tranquilly, my human failings are overthrown. Again, you get this sense of uplifting liberation. Being impartial, I attain singleness of mind. Impartial doesn't mean like the judge impartial. Impartial means you see everything as the same. All dharmas are just like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows. There's nothing to get. There's nothing to grasp because they are ultimately creations of the mind. That's what impartial means. The pleasure which surpasses the pleasure of even heavenly worlds. I'm sorry, folks, you got to pay attention. He just talks about pleasure. He's talking about the pleasure of leaving home. Now, everybody says, oh, you poor renunciants. Oh, I feel so sorry for you. You know, you're dragging your butts around and ragged clothes and you're begging for your food. And they're like, so why you guys look so high? Why are you so happy? What's going on here? Because the pleasure of that surpasses even the pleasures of the heavens, much less the pleasures of the world. As the Avatamsaka says, I leave behind these empty pleasures. My only pleasure is in leaving the world. This is a wonderful line from the Avatamsaka. Or going forth, you could say. So anyways, I'm just presenting this as Nagarjuna's verse. Others may seek to gain wealth and honor or fineries of dress and comfortable homes. But such pleasures lack true peace, since for one in pursuit of these gains, there's never any sati. There's never any fullness or satisfaction. This is like a line from my teacher. The mind of craving, the mind of thirst is like a bottomless pit. And the more you put in, the more empty it seems, and you can never get your fill. And then it says this here's an oxymoron expression, adorned in my patched robe. So often monastics don't get the best cut of clothes. They don't go to the Savoy and get a three-piece Buddhist outfit. They're actually, sometimes they patch their robes together. This is one of their Dhutanga practices. From heaps of rags, they sew them together. I don't have the picture of Shu Yun. I could show you him in his patched robe, but it's all little patches that he sewed together, not wasting material. And yet it says adorned in a patched robe. And most of us think adornment has to do with really nice clothes. And the opposite is here. It's almost like by adorning the heart, by adorning the mind, that trumps all other adornments. And often, I'm just going to be honest, I think sometimes we adorn our body with clothes out of a sense that we haven't adorned our soul and haven't adorned our mind. It's like a compensation for that and a covering for that. Same with makeup. You know, a person who leaves home doesn't wear makeup, wears these ugly clothes, and yet they're adorned and they have this radiance about them. Whether moving or standing still, I'm always at one within my heart. This is the second line. With my very own eye of wise discernment, I fathom the true nature of all thoughts and things. And then again, this is talking about wisdom everywhere examines, yet forever still. This eye of discernment becomes clear, totally clear, removed of all cataracts. Within the various gates, the sundry gates to the Dharma, I enter only to see that they're all just alike. Enter one gate deeply, when one connects, they all connect. So this heart that understands the why of things is tranquil. There's nothing that could surpass it within the whole triple world. So this is just such a powerful, positive verse describing not the renunciant, not the leaving behind, not the mortification, not the denial, but the liberation, the attainment, the buoyancy, and the clarity and pleasure. And I want to stress this, it's different than what we normally think pleasure to be, of sensual pleasure. This is a pleasure that makes sensual pleasure really look like dry wax. If you compare eating real fruit to wax fruit, the pleasure that's being described here that comes from this liberation from entanglements and the joy of being in touch with things as they really are, and more importantly, being who you really are, being really true to yourself. That pleasure is, as the verse says, even the gods don't really have this. So this is pretty interesting stuff. I could say more, but I think I will probably maybe make a final comment on this. I know there are people who are thinking of doing this, and I personally, this is my personal commentary, I would stress, do it for the right reasons. And the right reasons are that in your heart of hearts, you can see nothing else more significant and more important and more true to yourself to do than to do this. You may have second thoughts and misgivings, but they're coming from not your better nature. But don't do it to escape responsibilities and duties. Don't do it as an alternative to divorce, okay? Or, damn, I have these kids and they were cute at up to about 12 or 11 or 9, and now there are problems. I'm going to leave home, and renounce the family life. You don't renounce your karma quite that easily. Also, it's like, oh, they're doing a military draft. I think I'm going to leave home and become a cleric and get out of the draft. Or, man, I'm close to bankruptcy. I could declare bankruptcy or leave home. I think I'll leave home and just let my debts go, right? Can't touch me. I'm in the monastery. I have no possessions. All of those are wrong reasons. The other thing is, gee, if I leave home, people will really look up to me. I watch those darn people bow to them. And they give them all these nice things. They make offerings to them. So if I leave home, wow, people will bow to me. Nobody bows to me right now. They don't give me the respect. They diss me even. But if I left home, I'd get all these are the wrong reasons. And they won't bear fruit. Okay? So the real reason to leave home is because you brought forth this resolve to seek awakening, not only for yourself, but for all beings. And you see that there's nothing else really, truly worth doing. And everything else you contemplate doing actually is just a huge bummer. It's very depressing to even think about it, much less to do it. Then you're leaving home because you are going forth in the best sense and not escaping and running away. If you only leave home, it works. If you only leave home, don't bring home with you in your mind. So this is the other problem, that people kind of leave home, but kind of don't. You got to leave what's called the home of desire and afflictions, and not simply the house and your family relationships. If you don't do that, if you bring the desire and afflictions with you, even the desire and afflictions for respect and spiritual powers, you're actually then you're turning the monastery into a burning house. And you're also, in a sense, disrespecting it because you're polluting the way place. That's why Huineng says the straightened mind, the true mind, the mind that's directly looking at the mind ground and cultivating, is the monastery. The straight mind is the monastery. That's what he means by this. And that straight mind is a mind that's not seeking, it's not attaching, it's clearly seeing everything as dream, illusion, bubble, shadow. Then, leaving home really moves along. That's why Nagarjuna stresses what he means wholeheartedly, with your whole heart. That's the key to it being easy. If not wholeheartedly, as my teacher said to me when I was contemplating, well, should I stay at home? Should I leave home? Should I leave home? Should I stay at home? I'd be at the monastery for a week, and then I'd go back to my apartment, and then I'd be in the apartment for a week, I'd go back to the monastery. And he said, you got one foot in the boat going upriver, and you got the other foot in the boat going downriver. And eventually, it'll tear you apart. So make up your mind. And then I said, well, I'm thinking of leaving home. He says, thinking. There's either leaving home or not. I forget, what is it Yoda does in the Star World? Someone says, thinking, doing something. He says, just do, no thinking. Doing something like that. Thinking is not doing. This isn't easy. And I think perhaps why it's not easy is even with the best intentions, habits come. But as long as you don't retreat from that initial resolve, even if you make a mistake, you'll keep coming back to that deep resolve, and you'll keep cultivating. I think maybe that's why Master Hua had the sign over Gobal Mountain Monastery, try your best. And try your best was the idea that even with the deepest and most true resolve, there still can be setbacks, there still can be missteps. But, and this is why I say there's power in the repentance and renewal dharma within Buddhism, you can change, you can correct it, you can come back, you can start over. And that's why I said everything's a test to see what you will do, mistaking what's before your eyes. You have to, you can, you must start anew. And that hopefulness in that verse really expresses sort of the powerful dynamic, I think, of this teaching. It's not fated, it's not predestined, it's not a given. Even if you leave home, you still have to constantly be correcting those steps, constantly regulating and subduing, and returning and returning and returning. Eventually, though, it gets easier. So I'll stop there for tonight. I think probably... Oh, and I should say, yeah, go ahead. You're going to...
I'm going to hammer that.
Maybe Jin Chuan will be able to... Jin Hui is running the technology tonight.
Yeah, technology.
I assume
And we have
everybody's still plugged in.
We have the bathing Buddha.
Yeah, our usual tech guy is up bathing the Buddha.
No, I don't know if he's bathing the Buddha, but he's going to come back to help bathe the Buddha.
Oh, he's going to come back and help
So
bathe
he
the
has
Buddha.
to go
Okay.
up
Okay.
to do that. So Marty was talking about leaving home. I started reflecting a little bit about when I was leaving home, and there was one thing that kind of really struck me, because this time there was a verse at the very end saying how kind of taking delight in contemplating quiet meditation. And I actually remember that experience when I was just starting out. I remember being a teenager and discovering Buddhism and discovering meditation. And it was maybe 16 years old, 17 years old. And I remember at that time, when you're 16, 17, you're still very interested in relationships. Your kind of identity is caught up in seeking outside, say. And the discovery I actually remember there's a thoughts of, okay, can I be in a relationship, do these kind of things. And when I discovered meditation, I remember realizing, wow, there's so much I can work on inside. It's so deep. And that interest so much kind of fell away because there was something so fulfilling in this kind of inner cultivation. I know in the monastery we often talk about delighting in solitude, finding a kind of joy, being, you could say alone, but it's not a sense of being alone because we're often in community, actually in the monastery. But a kind of inner fullness where we're not looking outside for our feelings of being okay. And I remember just that those first times meditating was just like an inner light going off, going, wow, there's something really here. And my reflections also comes from Marty, just a few weeks ago, talked about languishing being a major thing now with the COVID, and people having to be kind of sheltered in place or socially distanced or being apart from each other. Although now it's kind of opening up a little bit. But in one way, if that kind of sheltering in place, being by ourselves, we had that sense of this is an opportunity to cultivate this kind of inner solitude, then rather than languishing, there can be actually a real inner joy, real inner happiness. And in some sense, the reason why this kind of path was so inspiring or liberating was because I remember just kind of being a young man at the time, looking at the world and feeling how the path that was kind of put before me, kind of growing up in Silicon Valley, maybe being successful in the world, being, doing a startup or something and making money, buying a house, having a family. I remember reflecting at the time going, wow, there's so many people around me who are successful by all worldly standards, but actually are quite lonely at heart. They're strangers in their own family, spouses not talking to each other, children not talking to their parents. I said, is this the path to real happiness? And so when I saw the Dharma, this kind of, you can say leaving home, this path, I thought, wow, there's a potential path out of this. This is amazing. And there was a kind of a real sense of liberation, I remember at that time. I won't maybe speak too much more, but there was another piece in this process I think was actually quite helpful for me, or important for me on this leaving home path, which is I first started out very idealistic. I remember when I first thought of becoming a monk, I thought, how come everyone doesn't want to be a monk? Because it's the only thing that makes sense, And although I didn't try to be, judgmental, I was kind of very arrogant, kind of thinking, this is really the right way, and everything else is kind of getting entangled and confused. And I had this very strong kind of ideal in my mind of what it meant to be a monk, and I was going to do that, and I'm going to be, really a good monk. And it took me, I would say 10, up to now still working with it, but I would say quite a few years realizing that that kind of idealism wasn't actually leaving home. It was leaving home into my own little world of what it meant to leave home. And it took, some good teachings, some little bit scoldings, gentle scoldings, my own kind of creating suffering for myself and learning, this isn't really that helpful. That I realized actually what leaving home isn't about kind of realizing some ideal or perfect vision of how I'm supposed to be. It's actually letting go of what that is and finding a kind of freedom. And I remember it's very interesting. When I finally asked Verhoeven Heng Sure, this was actually when I actually ended up joining the monastery, 2010. I went to Verhoeven Heng Sure and I asked him, do you think I can leave home? And his first response back to me was, "You talk slower now. I think you might be able to leave home." I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." That the speed of my speech was for him the main marker, or one of the main markers of how, I mean, he said how much stillness maybe I had, how much I've maybe actually let go of some of my habits of kind of pushing things and rushing things and forcing things into some kind of ideal. And then I had a chance to leave home, and it's still been ongoing process for sure. I think people know who have come to our monasteries in DRBA in Master Hua's Dharma is that every day you don't know really what will happen. In the monastery, lots of dharmas arise, but just the verse today was talking about the sense of liberation. I just feel extremely grateful that this path exists, and I have the opportunity to be able to walk on it, to cultivate it, to try my best. And I don't know how to say it. It's just there's a feeling of deep gratitude because this path has been maintained for millennia to this present day. And it's not just from the monastic side, it's been supported by the laity side as well. To be able to protect and care for the monastery is something, literally my body is sustained through the generosity of other people. Right? Everybody's probably now being in the monastery for since 2013, 2011 became a novice. I don't know how much time it takes for all your cells in your body to change out, but pretty much every single cell of my body has been given to me as a gift, at least the physical elements, right? So anyways, just some reflections on leaving home.
It's funny, one leaves, when you're talking about relationship, romance.
Yeah.
So you leave romance, but then you substitute a romantic ideal of the monk.
Exactly, the romantic ideal of the monk.
So you got
Definitely.
a romanticism replacing the romance, but it's equally frustrating and disappointing in the end. I was thinking someone once said, "Oh, I envy you. You've been able to escape from reality by becoming a monk." And I thought, at least my experience was, if you want to escape reality, the monastery is the last place you want to go. Any other place, go to a movie theater, go to Cancun, actually go into business, start your own business. All of that is a better escape from reality than going and sitting in quiet inner reflection in a monastery. So if you want to face reality, then I would say the monastery can be the place to go. But that requires some guts. That requires some courage and not just romanticism. But yeah, that's great. I want to say next Friday will be our last lecture for the semester. Tomorrow's the commencement for the university. We're going to do hopefully our last one online, Zoom. And then classes have stopped this week. I'm going to do one more Friday night next week with the Avatamsaka, and then take our summer break and pick up again in the fall. So, and I'm going to try to finish the verse section so we have a clean.
Wow, that's quite a few
I
verses.
know it's. Yeah.
Wow, it's like 3 or 4 verses.
Yeah, we're going to ride the horse and look at the flowers. But so next Friday will be the last formal Friday class for the summer. Any other announcements?
Yeah, let me just show people here. Right next to us is a bathing Buddha, the baby Buddha here. So let me show that. So if you haven't had a chance to do the bathing Buddha ceremony, this Saturday we will have an opportunity. Oh,
Tomorrow.
Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. We'll do a bathing Buddha ceremony, and following that, we'll have actually at 8:30 the 8 precepts transmitted at the monastery, followed by 3 days of Amitabha session. So if you kind of want to start out the new year with the Buddha, you can do that.
Really spring cleaning.
Yeah, spring cleaning, yeah. Well, we have a lot of people come to the monastery to clean up the monastery, and literally all the Dharma instruments on the altar shine. They kind of have a gleam to them. and somebody nicely put all these flowers out. So if you have a chance, we really welcome you to join us. Otherwise, Jingwei, any other? I mean, we have another one if people are interested in joining. On Friday mornings, we've begun a kind of a series of I don't want to say series. We've done 3 steps, 1 bow for India and the surrounding countries because of the pandemic. It's one way of kind of
Taiwan's
also been hit now too. So it's a kind of a chance for us to come together and have an intention in our hearts to heal ourselves, to purify ourselves. But in a sense, when we purify ourselves, it sends out ripples out into the world as well, and with the intention to maybe purify our atmosphere, hoping that those suffering can be free of suffering. The countries that are going through very difficult times can be free of that. So that's from 7 to 8 on Friday mornings. We do a 3 steps, 1 bow. But other than that, I think it's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. So we do dedication of merit. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the 3 jewels. Wish everyone good evening.